And welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me today, as always, is Shane Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. We are coming off a massacre loss, the biggest of my lifetime, the biggest of Shane's lifetime for sure. And it's just hard to swallow. It's tough to stomach a 35-point loss in a game that really could have been even worse. The Bills ended up pulling Josh Allen and a few of the other starters in the fourth quarter. And if they wanted to, they probably could have just piled it on. So even when Josh Allen was in that game, I mean, we're looking at 424 yards, 4 touchdowns. He did throw the pick in the first quarter, which gave us a little glimmer of hope. The Steelers got to stop there. But it was all downhill from there. So Shane, let's start with you. What was the turning point in this game against the Bills?
Honestly, if you want to look at a turning point, you could just say the first drive of the game where we get down the 2-yard line on a bad special teams play, and Allen just bombs down the middle with Gabriel Davis, and they just don't cover him. They can't stay with him. And like that kind of set the tone for what kind of day it was going to be, because that was the story. Like they couldn't get to Josh Allen, and whenever they didn't get to him, which was every play pretty much, he made us pay for it. And he's done it before, and he'll do it again, but it was especially bad in this game. I mean, he averaged 13.7 yards per completion, I think, or no, per attempt actually is per attempt. That's insane. That's double what any of our quarterbacks have done in like several years over the course of the season. Like it's hard to even compete with a team that can do that, but especially when your defense is getting destroyed the way ours was, especially after that first quarter moving forward in the second, they never had a chance. It was pretty much right from the get-go.
No, they didn't. And I agree that probably was the turning point right there, too. If they would have done something a little bit differently there, I know some Steelers fans are going to say, oh, that game could have gone a different way. No, the outcome's still going to be the same. I'm afraid, just because the Steelers are so outmatched in terms of talent. So, like, I mean, best case scenario right there, you've got Josh Allen backed up. It's what, 3rd and 10, 3rd and long. And he throws the 98-yard touchdown pass. They had Minka blitzing on that play. It's like, Tara Austin, what are you doing? I mean,
without Edmonds out there, too.
Yeah, Edmonds is out. So who else do you trust in the secondary? And knowing that Josh Allen's got a cannon on him, I mean, it was a perfect throw, perfect placement. But I mean, the outcome, I believe, would have been the same either way. Even if Minka gets a strip sack, picks it up for a touchdown there, Steelers start off with a 7-0 lead. Whatever happens, I mean, I just can't see the Steelers winning the game as good as the Bills looked, as bad as the Steelers looked.
That's what it comes down to, is like we were always outmatched, but then when they set the tone like that, they get a bad start to the game by every metric possible, and then they decide, you know what, we're just going to bomb down the field on 3rd and 10. We're not even going to worry about trying to get like room for our punter. Like most teams, you're just trying to get room for your punter and a 3rd and 10 on the goal line. And instead, they're like, nope, we're going to just beat you for 98 yards, and that's how the Bills win.
They play a little bit more aggressive, and it seems to work out in their favor more often than not. And I guess when you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, you can afford to do those types of things. Shane and I normally do winners and losers every week. It's so hard to pick out winners in this game, isn't it? Like, is there anybody that you want to highlight real quick, Shane?
I mean, when I did the studs and duds on StillCurtain.com earlier this week, like I focused on really only 2 guys, and it was George Pickens, obviously continuing his kind of mini breakout. Now that he's finally starting to get consistent targets. He played a really good game. He did everything that you could ask him to do. He made the type of plays that he's going to be expected to make for this offense. And then Kenny Pickett looked the part. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say he's a winner because we scored 3 points and he had to throw 52 passes, but he didn't look like a rookie who had no idea what was going on. He didn't look like a guy who was fazed by what was happening to him. Unbelievably so, honestly. I mean, I would have been fazed if I was him. But that is really positive moving forward, but it really wasn't a win necessarily in this game.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the only 2 players I think worth mentioning really in this game. I don't think the offensive line was a huge problem, but I also don't think there's anybody noteworthy that stood out in a positive light. But I agree. George Pickens, I mean, get this guy the ball. I mean, he's catching basically every catchable target you put his way. And now this is 2 very strong performances in a row. I'm encouraged with what his career is going to look like with Pickett at the helm there, because Pickett certainly seems like he likes to go to him and he gives him a catchable ball as well. And so, I think Pickett's going to have super good career, but one of the really only young bright spots right now to look forward to outside of Kenny Pickett, which again, I agree with you that he had a pretty solid starting debut, but it's just so hard to take away much of anything from this game when you are in a deficit that quickly. Like the Bills went on a 21-0 run in that second quarter. And so the rest of the game is just kind of catch up. It's underneath ball. I mean, they're playing cover 3, they're playing back. And so there just wasn't a lot of opportunity there. And it's not a lot to take away from it. I do want to note that he had a couple of really strong drives, like going from one end of the field to the next. One was stopped by the Deontay Johnson had the toe on the line. And I believe there was one in the second half where this was on a 4th down play. Johnson caught the ball and then immediately had it raked out of his hands. And so that was another potential touchdown drive there. Again, it's all kind of meaningless at this point because it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the game, but it would have helped Pickett a little bit, help his box score numbers. Because now in his first game and a half, he has 0 passing touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Not exactly the start that we were hoping for. So let's grade Pickett's first performance here against the Bills. And Shane, we'll start with you. I know you always do the grade article, quarterback grade every week. And so how do you feel that Pickett performed in this one?
I gave him a B, and I think it's fair because I think that if you look at his stat line and if you don't take in the context of the situation, it's an average game from a quarterback given the circumstances. It being his first start and getting down in a hole like he did and still not really making many negative plays on his own. Like there was a lot of negative plays for the Steelers offense, but a lot of them really didn't have much to do with him necessarily. Look at the drops by some guys, the 4th down plays that were just, so close where the ball was where it needed to be. It just didn't work out. He did, I think, everything he could personally to make this offense go. And it was just more the same where they just can't finish drives, right? They can't sustain drives a lot of the time, either due to play calling or mistakes. And it really kind of was a microcosm of their entire season so far on this game where everything looked good at times and then something would happen, right? Like something came up. So I think overall he played about as well as I could have asked him to, especially when you factor in the game script. So I did give him a B in this case, I think.
Okay, I'm right there with you, Shane. I've got him at a B-, and for the same reasons that you pointed out, I don't think he was aided a lot by his team at all. Outside of George Pickens, a couple nice runs from Jalen Warren when the game is obviously well out of reach at that point. And then there were some drop passes and plays that should have been made that weren't quite made. I mean, he almost had another interception off the hands of Deontay Johnson on a play that the Steelers ended up not scoring on that one. And so that was another one right there too. I feel like his team is not doing him a lot of favors in terms of making him helping him out in the box score and making him look better on the field. The one interception that he did have, it was a bad pass. It was a bad decision, but there was 17 seconds left before the half. And I mean, he's trying to make a play down the field. That was the one really bad throw of the game. I get the one to Johnson a little bit high, very catchable ball though. Hit him in the hands when he was jumping. And so the receivers have to do a better job of helping him out here. There's a couple that I noticed on the L22 as well, where like Chase Claypool's not running his route. He's kind of like dogging it and not going back to the ball. And so that hurt them, the Steelers a few times as well. I just feel like it's a collection of things really, but I mean, not the worst debut performance. The outcome was about as bad as it gets in terms of the score, but some positive notes from Kenny Pickett there, I thought. All right, let's talk about our biggest takeaway from the Steelers versus Bills game. We'll kick it off to you, Shane.
I think the first thing I need to mention is that Josh Allen dropped back over 30 times, was hit exactly one time. And that one time he was hit is when he threw a 98-yard touchdown. So that did you a whole lot of good. And of course, like you said, Minkah was the one who hit him on a blitz, which, again, why is he the one who's asked to do that in the situation? Whatever. But the fact that they hit him all of one time and that he threw 424 yards passing, that is such an issue that, like, obviously the pass rush has been very dead for the most part since Watt got hurt. We expected it to be not great. We were hoping better than this, but to hit Josh Allen one time, especially the way he plays, right? Like, he does want to get outside the pocket. Sometimes he can make those throws. To not even hit him more than once is just abysmal. Like, and again, I'm not surprised so much. Is just, that's my takeaway, is like, until they could figure something out or until TJ shows up and rescues them, this team is not going to beat anybody if they can't at least affect the passer, because their pass defense, especially with all these injuries, it's just not good enough. Even without the injuries, we saw that they're just not able to hold up in man coverage very well, especially against any sort of, number one caliber receivers. And it's not going to get any better unless this pass rush can figure something out. And I just don't see it happening at this point.
Yeah, it has been atrocious. Like, there's no other way to put it. I think the Steelers have the worst pass rush in the NFL when
Right.
TJ Watt is not on the field. When he's on the field, he's obviously a difference maker, game changer. And all the stats show that. I mean, sacks per game, the Steelers record with and without Watt. They're now 0-8 without Watt, and not against the best competition. Now, Josh Allen's obviously a great quarterback.
Yeah.
And so maybe this is a game they lose if Watt's on the field. Anyway, he probably doesn't make it 35
I would imagine not. Yeah.
No, I don't think he moves the needle that much. But I mean, they lost games against Jacoby Brissett, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones this year alone. They lost against Baker Mayfield last year without Watt. And so it makes a difference when he's on in the field and when he's not. But this pass rush is just inexcusable. Excuse me. Malik Reed has done nothing in Watt's absence. And it goes back to what I said earlier in the year is it blows my mind that you can invest so much and make your defense revolve around one player and yet not have any sort of valuable insurance for him at all in case he goes down. And I think maybe what bit them was the Melvin Ingram situation last year. It doesn't matter what it is, though. You can tell that without this pass rush, this defense is terrible. And so what I want to point out is the secondary, because it's noticeably worse without Terrell Edmonds, without Witherspoon back there. I know that Witherspoon had a tough 2-game stretch before his hamstring injury. But man, when you are asking these young guys, are you asking Josh Jackson to come in and play, or if you're asking Arthur Millette to cover Stephon Diggs from the slot, like it gets ugly in a hurry. And that's what we saw is the pass rush was not good, but these corners are also horrific. I think the secondary play in general was really bad. And like even Minka took a few bad angles that game. I don't fault him for the Gabe Davis play like that.
No,
the
that's
big
just,
one there.
That's
No, it's like he's still in great position. That ball was perfectly placed over the shoulder, right where only Gabe Davis could touch it. And even then, Minka nearly was able to rake that ball out of there and come away with the interception. But I mean, he's really the only guy in the secondary right now, and it's rough. And the front seven isn't a lot better because the linebackers aren't playing particularly well. Cam Hayward's getting double teamed. Highsmith isn't able to do a lot on his own. The sack, he's got the sack numbers, but the pressures are few and far between. And so there's just nobody else that can step up for them right now. So I think that the defense just continues to be a big concern and probably one that is bigger than we thought it would be at this point. All right.
I definitely agree there. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move on to our next topic of discussion. And that is the Steelers need to start a rebuild. I think you and I would both agree with that. And I'm talking a true rebuild in every sense of the word. None of this let's retool or let's reload like everybody likes to say on Twitter. You can't do that anymore. This team isn't talented. It doesn't have a good enough core and a good enough foundation to simply reload and expect those results. That's what Steelers did this past offseason when they got James Daniels, Mason Cole, Miles Jack, Levi Wallace. They tried to reload, and with those players in all the gaps they thought they filled, this is still a really bad football team. The Steelers are dead last in the NFL right now in point differential, minus 51 through 5 games. They're losing by 10 points a game. Now, I know a lot of that just came in the Buffalo game. But you also had probably the first 4 games was probably the easiest stretch of schedule that you'll get this year. Because after this, you still have to face Tom Brady, Jalen Hurts before the bye. After the bye, you're facing Deshaun Watson, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson twice, Derek Carr. They've still got some tough games against some tough quarterbacks. And I don't see the point differential increasing by much if they can't make some of these changes. But I think it's time for a total rebuild. Shane, what do you think?
I think that in general right now, the problem with the full rebuild, I think for them and what they're looking at is one, you have such an expensive defense right now, right? So you have to factor in like what money can we move? Is there a situation where we can start to save some cap without actually truly bombing the team of talent? And the other thing you have to consider too is even with this season, like we're probably going to have a very high draft pick. I'm not really sold that we're going to be the number 1 draft pick like we're projected right now. I do feel like at some point during the season we'll figure out enough games to not be the worst team in the NFL. But you're probably, if you really want to do a full rebuild, you're going to need to consolidate picks. You're going to have to actually move down from one of those positions in the top 5 if you want to really actually fill in all these positions that you need. Even in a true rebuilding sense, like giving up players for picks, this is just not what they do. And I'm worried they're not going to even entertain, even if it's like a small rebuild where you do tear down the team a little bit, make yourself theoretically worse for the sake of being better in 2 or 3 years. Because they need a franchise tackle at this point. They need probably 2 corners minimum if you really like Sutton, which I think he's still a good player. But I don't know if he will be by the time they're good. I think you have your safeties. I want them to bring Edmonds back. You can see the impact that
Mhm.
he's made. Him and Minka play really well together. You have your at least one, pass rusher. Obviously, I think Highsmith when Watt's on the field, he's plenty good as number 2. But you're gonna have to pay him. That's something you have to decide too. There's so many spots, even on a defense that's already so expensive, that you have to fill at this point. It's just going to be hard for them to do a true rebuild without completely tearing the team down to basically nothing outside of maybe TJ Watt and Minka.
Yeah, and certainly if we're looking at like the Kevin Colbert era, like that is not something he would ever consider doing. Now, what gives me a little bit of hope is the Steelers have Andy Weidel now as their assistant
Yes.
GM, and
With
we saw
the Eagles,
what kind of magic he was able to help work with the Eagles. You look at
Yes.
the Eagles team right now; they are loaded across the board, both in starting talent and depth, and so he was able to compound picks and stockpile draft capital. And it's even into the future. So this following year, the Eagles have it as well. And so
Yeah.
they're set up for success largely because of the proactive moves that they made, ones that Steelers have been kind of doing the opposite, where they're more willing to trade a high pick for a player or more willing to trade up in the draft, like we saw in 2019 with Devin Bush. They give up a first, second, and a future third-round pick, and some moves that really bit them. I do think the Steelers have a talent problem, unfortunately. Like of all the things that I want to pinpoint out, this is the last thing that I want, because when you have a talent problem, this is serious. It's not as simple as, oh, we just needed an offensive coordinator and everything's going to go smoothly next year. Now it could go better, but I think that the talent runs thin around this roster at most positions, and the depth especially. I cut that up this morning as well, and I've done some research, and between the 2015 and the 2019 draft class, that was a really, really rough 5-year stretch for the Steelers. I think that they had a really good 2017 class, but even from that 2017 class, Juju's gone, James Conner is gone. From 2015 to 2017, the Steelers have 2 remaining players from those classes, and that's a lot of draft capital. That's 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks. So 2 remaining players from those classes, and only 10 remaining players, total collection of players from that 5-year stretch. Only 5 of those are starters. So in that 5-year stretch in the draft, about 40 draft choices, you got 5 starters with the team right now. Like it's not good enough. It's not a good enough hit rate.
No.
And I know people want to say, well, they didn't pay Bud Dupree, they didn't pay Javon Hargrave. They could have kept James Conner. These are true things. They could have done that had they had enough draft capital or had they reworked their money. But let's look at those guys for just a second here. Bud Dupree has been a colossal waste of money, I think, right now for Tennessee. So far, I think he just did not turn out. Like, he was a good run defender for Steelers. He was good opposite of Watt because, I mean, who isn't most of the time? Watt draws so much attention. But I think Dupree at the end of the day is really just an average player who's not worth $16+ million a year.
No.
Now, Javon Hargrave is the one name that you could argue. Yes, the Steelers should have kept Hargrave, but that is truly a hindsight 2020 move, because you had Stephon Tuitt. You had this emerging player who was actually younger than Javon Hargrave, even though he was drafted before him, and looked like the second coming of Cam Hayward. Like, this guy was trending up, and I don't blame the Steelers for giving him a big contract, and the money actually looked really good at the time. And then he gets injured for a year, and he misses more time, and then this past year reversed that, but. And then he ends up retiring. And at 27 years old was the last time we saw him play football. So we didn't know how that was going to play out.
Right.
But again, this is just one player. We look at that sample as a whole, and I've compared it to a few other teams. It's really bad. It's a really bad 5-year stretch in the draft, and the Steelers just did not get enough talent out of that at all. And the other thing is, I think they've had too much roster turnover. Like, they're relying too heavily on these stopgap free agents, the Eric Ebrans and the Trey Turners of the world, that you have to bring in, and everybody looks at it and says, oh, wow, this guy was a former Pro Bowler, must be a good player. It just doesn't work out that way. You bring in a guy who is kind of a has-been at this point, and the Steelers have not had success with that in recent years. We're hoping it works out a little bit better with like James Daniels, Mason Cole. We'll see with Myles Jack. It's hard for me to envision him being on the roster next year with what his cap hit is. But I think that's part of the issue there too, is that they just have too much roster turnover. And I think it goes back to that 5-year stretch where they just were not able to retain players from those 5 draft classes in a row. All right, let's move on from – I could bash the Steelers draft classes all day. I don't want to do that because I do like some of the things that they've done in the draft. I mean, I think TJ Watt salvaged all of that a little bit. You get a generational type player there. but the collection just wasn't good enough. Let's move on. What coaching changes do they need to make, Shane, this coming off season or immediately? Well, how do you view that situation?
I already do think that what they should do right now with the whole Matt Canada situation. We've talked ad nauseum about this. We all know he's not good at his job. He just isn't. Like, no matter what metric you look at, he's just not good, right? I think that the first thing that they could do and should do is, because I know they're not going to fire him right now. They're just not going to. Like, it would take so much for them to actually can him in the middle of the season. The play calling duties has to become more of a collective effort. And Tomlin made a comment about like he's been involved in the offense or whatever too. And like if that's the case, then maybe he shouldn't be either, but that's beside the point. It needs to become more of a collective effort, and you have to listen to other voices. There's got to be somebody in that room that's like, listen, guys, we can't do this anymore. Like somebody has to be saying that. There's no way, whether it's Sullivan, quarterback coach, whoever it is, it's got to become more of a collaborative effort, and just even sitting down and like, I know he's a rookie. I know he's, not supposed to be the one that is doing this, but get Pickett in a room, be like, hey, what kind of stuff do you want to run? What stuff from Pitt maybe do you want to incorporate? Like stuff that he will know how to do, and it won't throw him off his game, but that might help the offense move a little bit. Whatever it is, that's going to have to happen, whether it's in the middle of the season, which I'd love, or, at the end of the season, he's going to be gone. I think Austin, honestly, the way that he's run the defense so far, and I know he's not, doesn't have TJ Watt. He's had injuries in the secondary. I think Flores is prime candidate to move up to DC next year. It's not going to happen this year, I don't think. Maybe he gets more and more involved or whatever the case may be, but he might be this team's DC next year, honestly. Those are the two. Like, I hate to say it with Austin because like this is his first chance to do it with us and everything like that, but like it just hasn't worked out. And you could tell some of the coverages. There was a moment in the Browns game, I remember, where he was running the same cover 2 shell 8 times in a row, it felt like, and Njoku just kept sitting in the zone and taking, like sitting down and just I'm like, do something else. Like, what are we doing? Like stuff like that is when I'm like, okay, I don't know if I can sit here and take very long. So I wouldn't be surprised if both of those positions end up getting switched around after the season.
Yeah, those are the exact two that I highlighted, and for the same exact reasons. I just wrote an article on that recently as well. But we'll start with Matt Canada, who, obviously things are not going well at all. They don't seem to really be improving that much. I love your idea about let's go to Kenny Pickett and see what he wants to do. How could that hurt at this point?
Yeah,
like, what would it hurt to
rookie,
go?
But come on.
A good coordinator should revolve their game plan around the skill set of their quarterback. And that's what we've seen all around the league. That's what good offensive coordinators do. We saw the difference Mike McDaniel was making with the Dolphins early in the season. Like he was the prime candidate for coach of the year because he was willing to make those changes to help out his quarterback. And so the Steelers need to do the same. Like, let me ask you this. Would you be okay? I know the Steelers won't do it because it's just not their way. Like it would have to keep going like this far south, but would you be okay with them firing Canada and making Sullivan the interim offensive coordinator for the rest of the season?
I think if you go to Sullivan and say, listen, if we bring you up to this position and Canada walks out the door, are you going to do everything in your power to make Pickett as comfortable and do the things he wants to do, regardless of what that might mean? If the answer to that is yes, and he's going to say, listen, the rest of the season is going to be about me and him sitting in a room with the offense and coming up with what kind of stuff can we run that's going to make it easy on you, the stuff that you see the field well with, all that stuff. If he's willing to say that he'll do that and he shows he'll do that, then I think you can make that move right now. If he isn't willing to do that, if he for some reason is on board with what Canada's been doing, offensively, then I say, there's no point then, right? Like if you're not going to be able to get either a completely new voice in there or at least somebody who's willing to switch things up pretty drastically, then there's no point in switching in the middle of the season because that's just going to create turmoil. But if you think you can get more out of this offense significantly by just having someone else be the voice there, then absolutely, I think you do it.
Yeah, and I can see it both ways. Like you want that stability for Pickett,
yes.
But at the same time, you don't want somebody that's going to like hinder the start of his career. And
damage his ability to be comfortable with stuff.
Or his confidence or any of that. And so I can see it both ways. If I had the choice, I might choose to do that because I think Sullivan's going to have that rapport with him a little bit anyway. And what would it hurt? I am not for in-house hirings anymore. Like it would strictly be as an interim position. And unless Sullivan like blows my mind with how good the offense is from here on out, then he's not getting that job long-term. But they need something to spark this offense. And honestly, I think they need a house cleansing. I really do. Like, I think it's time for at least the coordinators. And I agree with Terrell Austin as well, because that's all he's been doing is running a straight cover 2 shell. They're not creative with their blitzes. They're not doing anything like that to get their good players in advantageous situations, and they're getting exploited. Now, I think there's a talent issue as well, like we said, on both sides of the ball. And so I give him a little bit of grace there, but it's just everything has just been so blah from a coaching perspective. And so what I think really needs to happen, I think it needs to come from Omar Khan and the Rooneys to say, yes, we need a true rebuild. None of this reloading type stuff. We're not going to go in with the same roster next year, plus a few mid-tier free agents. Like, that's just not going to get the job done. And so and part of that needs to be, you got to go to Tomlin and you have to say, are you on board with this? Are you okay with us getting rid of our coordinators, hiring new coordinators, trying to get a little bit younger, a little bit more innovative? And if Tomlin's like, no, I want to retool, I want to reload, I want to get back out there and try to compete, we're not on the same page here. So I feel like it would be at that point, I would have to say, we have to do what's best for the future of this franchise, for the future of Kenny Pickett and what we're trying to accomplish in the long run, rather than just let's go 500 every year. Because I'll give you an interesting statistic, and it comes from Marcus Mosher. The Steelers, if they don't have if they don't have a playoff win this year, which, I mean, look how it's going right now.
Yeah.
If they don't have a playoff win this year, Mike Tomlin will be the only head coach in the NFL who's gone without a playoff win over the last 6 seasons who has not been fired. So just something to throw out there. And I know what his reputation's like. It was phenomenal early in his career, and he still hasn't had that losing season until probably this year. But at some point, if he's not with the program and where it's going to be, it's something you got to consider. And I think that Tomlin is a good head coach, but there's a time for everybody. Like, the Eagles moved on from Andy Reid. Andy Reid is still great with another franchise. The Eagles won a Super Bowl with Doug Peterson. And so it can work out. We've seen examples of that. But I want them to be on the same page, and they need to be on the same page. This team really needs a rebuild. They're just not in a position where they can compete for a championship. So that's my 2 cents there. So going along with this, Shane, in knowing that we would both like to see the Steelers improve and be competitive, maybe win a Super Bowl 3-4 years down the line, would you be open to them trading any of their players away? I know we kind of touched on trying to gain draft capital, but would you be open to them trading any of their players away? And if so, which ones would you consider trading?
I think you have to start considering it for sure. I think especially players that I would just say as a general rule, and kind of how I feel about any team that's going through a phase where they're not going to likely compete for a couple of years, and they know that. Any player that you don't think is going to be a part of what you hope is a really good team when you're done rebuilding in the next 2-3 years, if you don't think that player is going to be on the team, they don't matter right now. And that sucks to say that for some of the guys that, maybe want to stay with the Steelers and want to be one of those players. But if you aren't very confident that in 2 or 3 years that the player that's on the team is going to be still very good, or at least a part of a winning football team, they can be shown the door. Like, if a team really, and you mentioned it, like Miles Jack hasn't been like the worst linebacker in the world or anything like that. But if a team is willing to give you something for him at the deadline, and we're 1-7 or whatever it is, or 1-6, I do it, right? Like, get something for him. If you want to talk about, if somebody wants to give up something for Devin Bush of all people, get something for him. Any of these guys that are either expiring or close to expiring, or just you don't think are going to be part of that team in 2 or 3 years, it's time to start considering offers for them. Even a guy like, I don't want to say that I'm really confident about it anymore, but like Chase Claypool in the right fit, I think could still be a quality receiver. But at this point, he hasn't shown that he can run routes well enough, that he can get open well enough to be that catch and run threat. If somebody's willing to offer you something for him, especially like a mid-round pick, even that, I might say go ahead and do it, because you have Pickens now, and Deontay's not going anywhere for a couple of years with his contract, so you're going to have him. You hope Calvin Austin's a guy at some point. You have players. You can afford to get rid of a guy like him if you really want to, if someone's willing to give you something actually valuable for him.
Yeah, and I agree with the names that you mentioned there too. And it's like, look, what are we trying to accomplish here? Like, are we trying to get back to 6-7 wins before the end of the season, hurt our draft capital, not be able to get a Will Anderson or anybody that's going to be like that blue chip player in the draft? Because essentially that's where we are at this point. It's not what you want to root for. Nobody wants this team to be a 1-win team by the end of the season. And I'm not saying that they are. They're going to win a few more, I think. But I mean, if we have the best interest of the team in mind, then that really is, we're not going to win now. We're not going to win. And so I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, Shane. And this is one that's going to come with a lot of controversy as well, but I got to put it out there. Would you be willing to trade away a player like Cam Hayward, a guy that's going to be 34 years old next year? Because obviously, if what we're saying is true and the Steelers can't compete right now or even the year afterwards, they're just not going to be in position to do that with the lack of talent on the roster. Cam Hayward's going to be 34 years old. Would you be willing to trade him? Say if a team gives you, I don't know, a third and fourth round pick. I don't know if you can get that much for him at this point, but to a contender, I mean, he's got to be a valuable player. Like, he can go on and really make a difference to some teams. So is that something that you would consider?
So for me, like, you have to look at it almost like the JJ Watt trade. If with that situation a couple years ago now with the Texans, if Cam goes to the front office and says, hey, or goes to Mike Tomlin and says, hey, you guys are rebuilding. I know it. You know it. We're not going to be good right now. I want to go somewhere where I can try to win a Super Bowl. If he tells you that, right? If he's willing to say, listen, I want to go somewhere, then 100% you take him up on his offer. Because one, if he wants to do it, you're doing a player that's done so much for you a favor and saying, hey, we're going to go let you try to get a ring somewhere else. If he adamantly does not want to leave, I don't think I could possibly trade him. Not only just because he's still a good player, but because he is the heart and soul of this team at this point, especially with TJ not playing right now. And even then, Cam's way more of the vocal leader of this team anyway. Like, I wouldn't want to lose that for just that value, if nothing else, because you're going to have a much younger team than you already have in the next year or two. Having a guy like him who can still play, but also can kind of help nurture these guys a little bit, I think that's worth keeping him on the team just for that. But I don't see him wanting out, so I don't see it happening. Is kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, and for the record, I don't see it happening either. Like, I think there's almost no chance because the Steelers, like we said, they've been known to be loyal to a fault to their players. I love Cam. Like, he's a guy that I want him to retire a Steeler, and so I'm not advocating for this.
No,
I'm just saying obviously you have to do something to put yourself in a position in the future here. And that one, he's kind of like an untouchable. Like, I don't think unless you're right, he would have to go to the Rooneys and say, I want out. I want to win a Super Bowl somewhere. And that would basically be the only way. Otherwise, he's staying. But the other names you mentioned, Claypool, I would throw Chris Wormley in there if anybody thinks that he's good enough for a fifth round pick. I don't know. I mean, whatever you can get out of any of these guys, you might want to do it because some of them are pushing 30 and some of them just don't have a future. Like Claypool. We know that he has no future with the team. They're going to give George Pickens an extra contract, probably based on how his performance is so far. Deontay's already making too much money, so they're not going to invest money into a receiver who hasn't played well for them recently, but a guy who's combined for about 1,700 yards in his first two seasons, that could hold value to somebody. And so so basically how I view it is you want as many throws at the dartboard as you can. And so if I'm able to get like 10 draft picks next year or 12 the following year, however many it ends up being, because you're trading away old players that aren't part of the future, some of those guys are going to end up turning out. You're going to get some hits with there. And that's what the Eagles did. And they've been better off for it. And so eventually this team, they really do need to hit the actual reset button. They can't keep going on with their same philosophy that they've been doing. And so I'll be really interested to see how Omar Khan's and Andy Weidel's approach differs from Colbert's approach in these past few years. And in Colbert, obviously, we knew that his time was winding down with the Steelers. And so making short-sighted moves might have been just in favor of him. I don't know, but it hasn't helped the team. And so that's just something to consider. But we're on board with the rebuild. Let's get to an announcement, and then we're going to go ahead and talk about the Steelers versus Bucs. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Still Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, let's talk Steelers Bucs in this preview, this week 6 preview. And man, it's hard to see this game going very well after what we witnessed last week. Now, last week, the Steelers were 14. It's 14 flat. It was the biggest since the NFL merger back in 1966. This week, they break another record. They are 8.5-point home underdogs, which is the biggest that they've had as well in terms of being at home. We are not used to seeing this. Like, we're not used to seeing them be 2-score underdogs on their own turf against a 45-year-old quarterback. But Tom Brady is still playing at a high level. He's had rookie quarterbacks numbers forever. And so when you combine Tom Brady with a very good Buccaneers defense right now, it's just so hard to see us coming out on top of this one. Would you agree?
It's because the thing you can point at is you can say, oh, well, I mean, the Buccaneers offense hasn't been what it was, right? Like, especially the past couple of years. You say, oh, they only won by what I think 6 this past week against Atlanta and all this other stuff. And yeah, that's all true and everything. And that's great. This team just, I don't know who they could beat right now. Like, specifically this particular moment when you factor in injuries, when you factor in they do have a rookie quarterback, although again, he did acquit himself, I think, pretty well considering the way the run game is going right now. It just feels like I don't know who I would be able to point out and say, you know what, we could definitely beat that team. Maybe like the Panthers, because they're having all sorts of issues and they're, even though Mayfield wasn't good, he's hurt now. And now they're starting, I think, PJ Walker, whoever is going to be. Maybe them, and they just fired their coach. Other than that, I don't know who you point to and go, yeah, the Steelers are definitely better than X team. And especially the Buccaneers. I mean, their defense alone, just the way that they play defense especially, I do not see us really doing a whole lot better offensively than we have against them.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say that, I think.
No.
For can a Steelers definitively, when we know for sure that they would be favored against X team, and we can't even say that because we don't know that they would. If the game was at home and you're going against PJ Walker and the Panthers, then yeah, probably
give you a point or two.
Probably. Yeah, it's just that's the state of this team right now. And so, yeah, especially when you're going against a guy who knows the Steelers so well, in Tom Brady, and has had such success against them, against much better Steelers teams. And he's got a great defense. He's got a top 3 defense right now statistically in DVOA. And so it's just so hard to see us coming out on top of that one. Let's talk about the injury report real quick. Mike Tomlin didn't rule anybody out yet for this game, but Cam Sutton is dealing with a hamstring injury. Minka Fitzpatrick has a banged up knee. Witherspoon still a hamstring. Levi Wallace concussion. Fired with the concussions. Zach Gentry a knee. In Montravius Adams now a hip injury. The injuries are starting to mount up, and you can't have injuries when you don't have depth. Like, the depth is atrocious on this roster, and so if some of these players end up missing time, it's really going to hurt them. The one that really scares me, Shane, is Pat Freiermuth's concussion. Yeah. This is his 3rd in just the beginning of his 2nd season, really. And I worry about the longevity of his career. Like, this is a guy I want him to be that 10 or 12-year tight end for them, because I think he could be that good, but the concussion scares me a little bit. I would certainly err on the side of caution with him. I would not bring him back too early. There's nothing to gain at this point. And so if you need to sit him out another 2 weeks before he's you're very confident that he's ready to go, then I would do just that. But what other takeaways do you have from these injuries this week?
First, I do want to touch on the fact that with Freiermuth especially, that has to be handled as comfortably as he possibly can be handled. Like, you do not want this to become a consistent issue. It already has, really, at this point. And you don't want him having the thought of like, oh man, maybe I need to just say it's over. Like, and you don't want, obviously he needs to do whatever's best for him, but I don't want him to be put in that position. Especially if Gentry can go, which we'll see about that. But the thing that I have to look at is our entire secondary is banged up. Literally the entire thing. Like, no matter what, even if 3 of these 4 guys play, they're all going to be either banged up or not at 100% at the very least. And especially if all 3 corners are out, if that were to be the case, I don't even know what your plan is. Like, what do you do defensively? Because none of the guys you have can cover anybody. They just can't. Like, I don't know who you even call upon to play. Like, I don't know what kind of strategy you have. I might just blitz literally every play and just hope that Brady throws a stupid pass or something, which is dumb to even think he will, but whatever. Like, that might be better than anything else at that point, because you're not manning up Mike Evans with anybody we have anyway, but especially not the guys that be playing if all these guys are out. Like, it's just an impossible situation. Like, if all of these guys play, it's still going to be so difficult. If any of them are out, it just makes it that much harder. It's insane.
It really is. Like, even if the Steelers were at full strength defensively right now, you still have to account for Tom Brady, and you still have to find a way to get pressure. And so knowing that several of these players in the secondary are projected to be out for this game, it's going to be another rough showing. Now, I don't expect Brady to put up 424 yards, 4 touchdowns like Josh Allen and 50 yards rushing or whatever, but I still think he'll do more than enough probably to stroll away with this one, unfortunately. So let's highlight some of the biggest matchups that we need to watch. If there's a Steelers, a chance that they could pull this thing off. These are some of the biggest matchups we need to watch here. And I want to start with Steelers offensive line against the Bucs defensive line. Bucs are just strong all around. Like they don't necessarily have superstars everywhere. They're not, I don't think they're like the Bills that way where there's an Von Miller that you have to account for, but they're just really strong. And so this is another one of those matchups. Their defensive line is third in the NFL right now in sacks. Like I said, the defensive DVOA is really well. Their pressure rate is good. And so this is a team that held the Dallas Cowboys with Dak Prescott to 3 points in week 1. I know kind of some fluky things happened in week 1, but they were able to do just that. They did have one bad game that came a couple weeks ago against the Kansas City Chiefs. They allowed 41 points. Very uncharacteristic of this Bucs defense that we've seen over the last few years. But outside of that, I mean, even with that game included, they've only allowed one 15-point game this entire season, and that was it. And so the Steelers, meanwhile, they struggle to score 15 points. And so it's that perfect storm against them once again, where it's like, I don't expect a high offensive output from the Steelers. I just want Pickett to be well protected enough so that he can continue to build that confidence a little bit, make some plays over the middle of the field, down the field. And I'm hoping that he gets that window of protection, kind of like he did against Buffalo. I think the protection was good enough. There were plenty of other issues we could have pointed to. But that's definitely one of the matchups I want to highlight. And I also talk about real quick is Steelers pass defense against Tom Brady. Like Tom Brady has picked apart some quality Steelers secondaries in the past. I expect him to do the same, even in his old age, just because he's so smart. He knows where to go with the football. Like he will be able to pinpoint that weak link, Arthur Mollett, Devin Bush, wherever it is, and he's going to exploit it every time. And so, man, to think that the Steelers and Tomlin and Terrell Austin will be able to out-coach the wits of Tom Brady and where he goes with the football and the adjustments that he makes himself, it's just hard to believe that they're going to be able to find a way to cover themselves there and to not make their weaknesses look so exploitable. So I just think that that's a matchup that could really struggle with, especially, and Tom Brady gets the ball out fast too. We're already talking about a team that doesn't get pressure. He also gets the ball out fast and he knows where to go with it. So it's just one of those just nightmare matchups.
Yeah, I really hard pressed to disagree with you on any of that. I think that the offensive line, I think, has a chance to be okay. Like, because we've seen them play rather well so far, especially pass protection wise. Like, I'm not as concerned about this game from that perspective as I was coming into the year, for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I don't know if it matters because, again, like, we can't come up with a way to score 15 points normally, right? Like, against teams that shouldn't be holding us to 15 points. Asking them to, like, basically Pickett's going to have to play the game of his life up to this point, like college, high school, NFL. Like, it's got to be the best game he's probably ever played just for us to maybe score 25 points or 24 points. Like, and that's what's so hard about this is you can say, yeah, you know, we might be able to get some stuff going especially if they're aggressive and he can beat the blitz and whatever else. But we also have to watch on the other side because if Brady's putting up 40, it doesn't matter if we score 24, right? Like that's the other problem with this is that the two sides of the coin are destroying each other right now. And the defense can't stop anybody and the offense can't get out of its own way long enough to not stop themselves. And it's just colliding with, and then you get a 38-3 game. Like that's kind of where we're at right now. And I wouldn't be that surprised if maybe not as bad, but a similar result happens in this game just because both sides are feeding into this negativity and it's just causing everything to kind of crumple in front of us. And this is not the team to be facing right after 38-3 loss that you had. It just isn't the time.
Yeah, it's just another one of those really bad matchups. And this is the second week in a row. And it's why you and I were both opposed to the timing of Kenny Pickett. We wanted to see Kenny Pickett on the field, but it's like you put him in at this time, you throw him in the second half of the Jets game, knowing that his 4-game stretch before the bye was Bills on the road, Tampa Bay at home, and then you get the Dolphins and the Eagles both on the road before the bye week. And that is just a brutal stretch of games. And so I'm hoping he can come away in one piece, first of all, and secondly, with him being able to build up his confidence a little bit. Like he needs to get a passing touchdown here.
Yes.
And I think he is a very confident guy, but it's like, I don't want him to start like 0 touchdowns and 8 interceptions before he finally gets that first thing, because that it can just be a real confidence killer there.
Start approaching that Alex Smith 2005 stat line, like 1 touchdown, 11 picks, I think it was his rookie.
You don't want to go that route. You don't want to go that route.
It kind of worked out for him ultimately.
Well, it worked out for him. I worry about Pickett getting gun shy. Like that is the thing. Is he like I'm going to throw my 6th interception or whatever. That's what I worry about a little bit. And so that's where the numbers come into play for me. It's not so much the results on the scoreboard or whatever else, but if the numbers are going to shake the confidence of my rookie quarterback, then that's where I start getting a little bit worried. Other than that, like if Pickett's not worried, I'm not worried. I'm fine. Like I said last week, if he goes out there and throws 16 touchdowns and 22 interceptions this year, then so be it. If it doesn't shake his confidence and it makes him not get gun shy and continue to throw the ball down the field, because he's either going to get it or he won't. And we want to see him get it, obviously. So Shane, what is your key to success this week? Theoretically, if the Steelers are able to have success and find a way against the Buccaneers this week, what would that be?
They will need a minimum 3 forced turnovers on defense. So they're going to have to take the football away, whether it's forcing a fumble, whether it's picking Brady off, not super likely with the secondary the way it is. They need a minimum 3 like big plays defensively or special teams, right? Like that. I think that's the bar you have to hit to keep it competitive. And then offensively, Pickett has to basically say, you know what? I don't care about the fact my coordinator isn't any good. I don't care that my receivers don't make timely catches. I'm going to figure it out and make something happen. And he just has to play out of his mind. And I think, honestly, just looking at last week, like I'm not that, like, I wouldn't say that's impossible for him to do it, right? But his receivers have to help him a little bit because, again, like outside of Pickens, like Deontay had a lot of plays that were like just barely missed or just he wasn't really on the same page with them. And Chase, like you said, just wasn't really getting open and coming back to the football. Like they have to go out there and say, you know, we're going to do every single thing we possibly can for our quarterback. Like I'll you know, whether it's blocking their ass off on every run, whether it's whatever else, like you have to do something above and beyond what is expected of you at this point to try to get this offense going. Those are the 2 things that have to break their way, or else I don't think it's going to even be close.
Yeah, I agree. If you're minus in the turnover department, it's not happening, not with this Steelers team. And so I would agree with that. I want to say the key to success is getting pass rush. I just don't know if that's attainable without TJ
Exactly.
Watt.
I don't think so.
We've not seen it at all. And so I think that they are going to have to come up with some other sort of splash in terms of creating turnovers. In blitzing, whatever, and bring the house against Brady. I don't know, because if you sit back there and you try the 4-man rush again, it's not going to work. And he's going to pick you apart just like he always does against that. And so that's probably mine as well. I think the Steelers offensively, they can probably afford to be maybe a bit more conservative offensive game plan than they were against Buffalo. And that game got, again, so out of hand that we didn't even get to see what the game plan was going to be otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
But again, you're talking about a competent Buccaneers team here. You're probably not going to be able to exchange blows with a field goal every other drive. You're going to need to get aggressive. You're going to have to go for it on 4th down when you're on the other side of the field. I got to stop right here in the middle of a thought. And you may know where I'm going with this already.
Yep.
What was Mike Tomlin doing? Going for a field goal against the Bills? What was a field goal going to do at that point after Bucks went on or Bills went on like a 21-0 run? Like I honestly wonder sometimes if he's just trying to save face and say, yeah, I want to get double-digit points on the scoreboard by the end of this game so that it doesn't look so honestly, like, yeah. I don't know how else do you pin it? Like, I don't know.
For me, that's almost what it is. It's just like, I want to see some points on the board. Like, it's like, he's like, I need my offense to see, yeah, we got some points. That's what it honestly feels like. And obviously that's not the approach you take in this situation. It just isn't. I think even he probably knows that and just, it's like, you know what, maybe we'll feel better if we make sure we get some points here. And then, of course, you do it on a day where the wind is swirling and Basel misses both his kicks. Like, that's obviously like an absolute doomsday scenario to make those decisions and then also miss the kicks. Like, that's just the worst it could be. Yes. But, yeah, you need to go for that there. And I think, you know, if it was actually weirdly enough a closer game, I think that he might have gone for it because it would have mattered more. But I think at that point, he just wanted to try to get a little bit of confidence going with the offense. But it just didn't.
That one. I can't say that I'm completely shocked. But,
no, not really.
But I mean, because Mike Tomlin has been statistically, he's the most conservative coach. I can't remember how many years now that stat was, but it was in terms of going for it on fourth down, like he is dead last
He
in the
does not
league.
like it.
And so we just come to know it at this point. Like I was not surprised to see the field goal unit out there. It's just like, what are you doing? I mean, any chance of a comeback, you need to go for it there.
Right.
So besides the point anyway, but
you need to be in between. Ironically, two AFC North head coaches. You want to be not Mike Tomlin, but you also don't want to be John Harbaugh, because if you're either of those guys, everyone yells at you all the time. Because Mike never goes for it, and John goes for it in the weirdest ways, in the dumbest situations. It's so funny that like you want to be in the middle of those two guys.
you got to find that balance of the perfect balance of analytics where you go for it in the right timing. And I think the good teams kind of have that down pat. And obviously, like the better your offense is, the more you're going to trust them going for it in a fourth and short situation. But I mean, in that situation right there, I mean, given the circumstances, you can't exchange field goals with Josh Allen when he just went on a 21-point run. So anyway, back to Steelers Bucks. Let's go ahead and give our predictions for this week before we sign off here. We'll go ahead and start with you, Shane. How do you see this game going?
Poorly is probably the first word I would use. Realistically, I think that the spread is totally fair. I think that we ultimately probably will lose by at least that many. I have 31-20. I think that we do get a little bit more offense going, especially, maybe down the stretch of the last part of the game, maybe get a touchdown later, something to make it a little closer. But it just feels like right now there's nothing this defense can really do against teams that have like a capable offense. And they have more than a capable offense when things are going well. Obviously, you have Brady at quarterback. You have all these receivers. Like Mike Evans might have 200 yards in this game because who's covering him? Like at least with the other receivers, like they're more route runner types or guys run after catch. Like who's going to take Mike Evans down the field? Like I don't know how that's going to go. But honestly, like I'd be very surprising if it wasn't at least a 2-score deficit, I think, by the end of the game.
Yeah, I cannot say that I disagree with you here. I was more optimistic earlier in the season. It's so hard to be after that last game and knowing that they're doing another difficult opponent right now. I've got the Steelers losing 28-17. Again, it's so hard. I think it's going to be so hard to even get to that 20-point mark with this defense and how good this defense is. I'm hoping that this is the game that they kind of just the offense takes off regardless, but both you and I have them losing by 11 points this week, which, again, we don't have the Steelers covering the spread, and I wouldn't advise towards it this week because there's just no evidence there. And until they start turning something around, offensively or defensively, there's no basis to have them really covering the spread when even with a spread that's that large on your own turf. I just don't see it happening. Some things to watch for this week. I would just look for it. If we could, I would be okay if we came out of this game, regardless of what happened on the scoreboard, if we see some really encouraging signs from Kenny Pickett, that's what I would love. Otherwise, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I just think the Steelers they're kind of destined to start off 1-5 at this point, just with the way that things have worked out so far. And you get another really tough matchup this week.
Yeah, I'm hard pressed to disagree. I just think that we're at a point, and I think ultimately, if we hit the bye and we're 1-7, right? That's when we're going to know how much things are going to change and how quickly they're going to change. Because during that bye week, if we are 1-7, if Mike Tomlin does not go scorched earth on everything and just say, listen, if you're not going to help us win, you're not going to be here type of situation, then I don't know what we're going to expect to see then if that doesn't happen by that point.
Yeah, that was always like kind of worst case scenario in my mind. Like, could Steelers potentially start that bad? And where they needed to be better, really, Shane, I think was the beginning of the season when you had a matchup against Brissett and Mac Jones. Yeah. And those are the games, like, realistically, starting the year with a healthy TJ Watt and everything, and I don't want to put too much emphasis on one player here, but I think there was a scenario where Steelers could have started off 3-1 to begin the season.
Yes.
And if we're looking at that, then whatever happens in that following stretch before the bye won't nearly be as bad, but I think there's a realistic chance now this could be a 1-7 football team entering the bye week, and people could be talking around them circles in the NFL media as potentially the worst team in the NFL. And it's been so long since we've been here, and I don't like how it feels, Shane. I got to be honest.
No, I mean, I've talked about this, and we talked about this actually pre-show, but like I've been saying for about a year or two now, like it's coming. And I think most people who look at it objectively, they knew it was coming. Maybe not this bad, but like Steelers fans have had it so good. And, any of you watching, like, if you obviously being a Steelers fan, don't take this wrong way, but like I don't think that you guys really are understanding just how bad this team is right now and how capable they are of being bad moving forward. And it's tough because we've been so used to, and the same thing like the Patriots had to go through that first year without Brady, and even now they're not a great team, honestly. Like it's a transition period. And obviously, even though Ben wasn't the same player that he was at the end of his career, and he wasn't like this savior type of guy, and then he just disappeared, it still is a transition without him there. And now you're seeing like what this team looks like when your star players either aren't playing as well or they're hurt, and you don't have a cohesive offense. You don't have a veteran quarterback that at least can try to make it work around it. It's tough, and it's probably going to be tough for a while, but just you got to kind of buckle up and just be ready for that for the next year or two.
Yeah, and while we're on that topic, I just want to say again that I wanted the Steelers these last 2 years with Ben. I really think that what they probably should have done, I've written about this many times, and it doesn't draw well with fans sometimes because you don't ever want to think that way.
No.
But I think the Steelers should have been making more proactive moves all along,
Knowing
knowing that this point was coming. Yeah, instead, they were trying to hang on to a pipe dream, which is essentially what that was, of another Lombardi trophy with an aging Ben Roethlisberger in a team that was trending the wrong direction. And I just don't think that that was the right approach. I know that you had Ben in his final years. You want to try to capitalize on them. I think that they would have been better off being much more proactive during that time with how they spent their money, maybe letting some of that roll over so that you can buy some like cornerstone players in free agency, short-sighted draft picks. And we talked about like the Najee pick. And now I don't think Najee's window is going to line up. By the time this team is good again, the wheels are going to fall off the guy. And it stinks. So
him being in the situation he's in, we didn't really talk about it much, but like that hurts because I even said it in the Studs and Duds article I mentioned earlier. Like it's at a point where Warren needs to be getting the most snaps in the backfield. And it's whether it's because Najee's hurt, which I still think he is hurt at this point, honestly, just looking at him last year versus this year. He doesn't look the same. He's never been a bursty guy like with a ton of juice, but he's not even close to even having any right now. Like if he is hurt, I really think it's time to sit him for however long it takes for him to get healthy, because you see Warren can at least be a quality player for you. And like you said, everything else, you have to just start figuring out who's going to be here in 2 years when you're good, hopefully.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, we're going to sign off here. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shane Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also check us out on YouTube. Thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.